Hi everyone, good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. You're watching Perspective نقطئہ with Ovais Iqbal on GEO TV. Rising hate and Islamophobia in Canada has gone a bit too far now. And National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM, has called for National Action Summit to fight Islamophobia. But before I introduce my guest here tonight, let me show you what Prime Minister of Canada had said after the June 6, 2021 incident in London, Ontario.
Lately, a lot of Canadians have been enjoying evening walks to get a bit of fresh air after long days at home during this pandemic. On Sunday in London, Ontario, that's what a grandmother, 2 parents, and 2 children went out to do. 3 generations of the Afzul family. Salman, Madia, their children Yumna and Fayaz, and their grandmother. But unlike every other night, that family never made it home. Their lives were taken in a brutal, cowardly, and brazen act of violence. This killing was no accident. This was a terrorist attack motivated by hatred in the heart of one of our communities. Mr. Speaker, if anyone thinks racism and hatred don't exist in this country, I ask to them this: how do we explain such violence to that child in hospital? How can we look families in the eye and say Islamophobia isn't real?
You just saw what Prime Minister of Canada had said, that Islamophobia is real, it exists in Canada, and we need to fight Islamophobia. And this is where the purpose of today's show is. What NCCM has called for is National Action Summit to fight Islamophobia. What should we expect from this summit, when it's going to happen, and what sort of recommendations NCCM is going to put forward in front of the government to fight Islamophobia. So let me welcome our guest here tonight, who's the CEO of NCCM, Mustafa Farooq. Brother Mustafa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ovais.
Very good. And before I start talking to you, why not I show a quick clip of NCCM, because myself and people are thinking and asking this question: who's going to be doing advocacy on our behalf 24/7? And NCCM is an example in front of us. So viewers, let's watch what is NCCM, and then we'll continue our conversation with Brother Mustafa Farooq.
Abu Bakr Thabti, Azzuddin Sufyan, Ibrahim Bari, Khalid Belkazmi, Abdul Karim Hassan, Mamadou Tanou Bari. We should remember that at this time last year, these men and their families were going about their business in very much the same way that we are today, yet they're no longer with us.
As a community, we're operating in a very challenging environment, probably one of the most difficult environments since the beginning of the post-9/11 era.
NCCM is very clear that they're fighting for human rights.
What they do every day is advocating for people that they don't have a voice, they can't defend themselves.
This organization will always make the point of defending the Muslim community against the kind of hate that we are seeing today.
We all rise and fall by the standards of rights that are protected for all of us.
I owe a huge debt of gratitude to NCCM for inspiring my children in identifying issues and being part of the solution.
There's only one organization that I've seen in the last few decades with the sophistication and the passion to defend your rights, and that's NCCM.
Mustafa, first of all, why don't you tell us this, what's the purpose of this, calling this National Action Summit? And people are still asking, although the government have accepted it, they are going to call it, when it's really going to be called?
Sure. So the National Action Summit on Islamophobia will, inshallah, take place next week on Thursday the 22nd.
July 22nd.
That's right.
Very good. Is that going to be a virtual event, or it's going to be a big physical event? How the setting is going to be set up?
No, given the COVID protocols right now in Ontario, it's going to be a virtual event.
Virtual event. So what are we expecting? Is Prime Minister of Canada attending the event, or who is basically chairing and leading this event?
Well, I mean, we expect to have, on earlier after the London Muslim Mosque called for a National Action Summit on Islamophobia, and after we at the National Council of Canadian Muslims and many others called for a government to take up that ask, a motion was passed in the House of Commons, by all parties. It's called a unanimous consent motion, which essentially called on governments to host a National Action Summit that involved all three levels of government: federal, provincial, and municipal. This is really important because the reality is that from a policy perspective, fighting Islamophobia requires a whole of government approach. And that's who's going to be attending. We fully expect to see representation from the provinces, from major municipalities and smaller municipalities, as well as the various ministries in the federal government to be there. This is not a conference. Let's be very clear. This is not a place to, raise academic questions about whether Islamophobia is real or not. We know it's real. The point of the summit is to set clear expectations and timelines for action. And without that action, the summit is not going to be a success. It's plain and simple.
So do you feel comfortable, up until now, we have seen so many incidents have taken place in Canada, because of hate and Islamophobia. Now, this National Action Summit, this is itself, it's a big achievement that NCCM and other groups have come together and, put government responsible to call something like this. What's the message for people, those who are watching? Because one incident, takes over another incident, and we think that nothing has happened and nothing will be happening. So what sort of expectations we should have as ordinary Canadians?
Well, our expectations are very simple. Until the violence is over, until we drive out systemic Islamophobia from our systems, our battle is not over. As long as this state of affairs continues, our work continues. But we have to be very cautious in noting that, to not fall into a kind of apathy. One of the dua that we make in the Muslim tradition is we ask protection from a sense of feeling that we can't do anything, that we are bound to a sense of apathy. That's very dangerous, and that's exactly what those who want to scare us, that want to scare us because of our faith, that's what they want from us. They want us to be afraid. We cannot allow fear to take over our lives. Instead, and again, I fully understand, and having been, as somebody that's on the phone with folks every day and meet folks every day that go through these things, I think that to some extent I can sympathize with what folks are going through, and I understand where the fear is coming from. But to whatever extent we can, we have to take the fears that we have, the legitimate fears that we have to take the anger that we feel, and we must try, at least to the best of our abilities, to direct it towards change.
Right. And one other thing which I hear from people, for example, when the horrible incident took place in Quebec Mosque, and then we look at London incident and maybe many other incidents in between, when any of those things happen, people start looking at mosques. They look at the mosque platform that they would represent them and they would do something about it. But I personally believe that that's not their sole job. So how should people look up to mosque where we think, maybe 5 to 10% people would be practicing and rest of the population is not very much connected to mosque. So how NCCM is filling up that gap?
Sure. So, I mean, I will say that we at NCCM, we connect a lot with our masajid, but we also connect a lot with average folks who may not belong or, associate with being part of any masjid community. We are in touch and work with over 180,000 Canadian Muslims, the vast majority of whom are, identify as practicing Muslims in some way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are connected to any given masjid. And so for us, it's really important that wherever you're coming from, whatever sect, background, approach, we're not here to do a religious litmus test. Our perspective is very simple. If you want to stand for justice, if you want to stand for fairness, if you want to stand for a better tomorrow, we need you. It's very simple. And we really do. The scale of the scope of the problems demand that every person in Canada, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, by the way,
yes,
stand up to do the right thing.
Very true. Everybody have to stand up. So how big is NCCM's operation? How many offices you have in the country? Can you please elaborate on it for our viewers?
Sure. So we have offices in Toronto. We have offices in Ottawa. We have an office in Quebec. And we just launched an office in Edmonton. But we definitely have volunteers from coast to coast. But in terms of our formal offices, that's where we're at.
And how big is the team of NCCM under your leadership?
Alhamdulillah, we have about 15 folks who are working here at NCCM. But ultimately, I'll tell you that it is a very tiny a number, that includes full-time and part-time staff, that's actually needed to fight the problems that are in front of us.
So Farooq, what we see is when it comes to ask for money for mosque, masajid, and those kind of institutions, people open up their pockets and then they donate in month of Ramadan and maybe other times of the year. But when it comes to support organizations, advocacy organizations like NCCM, how difficult do you find to align people towards that kind of cause where you need to hire the top talent and you need to have offices in these places and you need to have linkage 24/7 to advocate on behalf of the wider community?
So I mean, look, I think the reality is that our community is a generous community. Canadian Muslims are generous people. We donate to help those who are in need. And this isn't, and I don't think that any of us who are committed to our sense of deen should view this as a zero-sum game. In other words, by donating to masajid, we shouldn't think, this year I'm not going to donate to help people in Pakistan, or I'm not going to donate to help people in Somalia or in Iraq or Palestine or wherever. I'm only going to donate to domestic causes. We're taught in our Quran, in our Hadith, that donation is one of those things that actually grows our wealth. And I can tell you as a lawyer and as somebody who, before coming into the non-profit scene, I saw that firsthand. Donating to a variety of causes, a variety of important causes, is really important for everybody to do. And you will see the barakah enter your life. I've seen this firsthand, and many, many other folks have seen this. And may Allah, make me, first of all, more generous in the work that I do. What I will say is that, in the past, certainly, I think a lot of folks didn't know what NCCM was. They didn't know about the need for this kind of work, but I think as more people are learning, more people are standing up. We certainly need more support. I can tell you that we get, dozens of calls a week from folks needing legal support. If you've ever talked to a lawyer, you know that stuff isn't cheap. And so, the more support that we can get, the more that we can do. It's very simple. And alhamdulillah, with your support, we've been able to accomplish a lot. Just in between the London attack and today, groups like the 3%ers, one of Canada's most dangerous Islamophobic groups, was banned after an NCCM advocacy push that we did internally, to government. This was a group that actively surveilled masajid in Alberta, that armed themselves. And if you type in the 3%ers you'll see all sorts of articles about their operations in Canada. This was a violent, terrifying group planning on hurting Canadian Muslims that we were able, alhamdulillah, to work to have dismantled and banned. We need to see much more of that, and that's why we need your support.
Absolutely, and well said. And viewers, here we'll take a quick break, and once we come back from the break, we'll talk about what's the success criteria of this National Action Summit. What sort of outcomes that we might see coming out from this National Action Summit, and more importantly, what should be our role, my role, your role, in terms of strengthening what NCCM is doing, because it's not easy for an individual or every individual to raise the voice on his behalf or her behalf or on behalf of the community. We need organizations like NCCM and how we can all come together and play our role. So please stay with us after the break. ہمارا رویہ اور طرز عمل دونوں جنم لیتے ہیں ہمارے احساسات اور جذبات سے، جو وجود پاتے ہیں ہماری سوچ اور نقطۂ نظر سے۔ مثبت سوچ رکھنا اور ہر معاملے میں نقطہ فہم ہونا بنتا ہے باعث انسانوں اور معاشروں کے درمیان اچھے باہمی تعلقات کا اور عدم برداشت کا. تو آئیں شامل ہو جائیں مثبت سوچ کے اس سفر میں. دیکھیے پروگرام نقطۂ نظر اویس اقبال کے ساتھ صرف جیو ٹی وی پر.
کینیڈا سرمایہ کاری کے لیے جنت. ٹورنٹو کی گنجان آبادی کے باعث اب آباد کاری دوسرے شہروں میں اوٹوا، برامپٹن، مسیساگا، کنگسٹن اور دیگر شہر اب سرمایہ کاری اور آباد کاری کے لیے آئیڈیل. آپ کمرشل، ریزیڈینشل یا انڈسٹریل پراپرٹی خریدنے یا بیچنے کا ارادہ رکھتے ہوں تو ٹیم آف سید کو ایک دفعہ کال لازمی کیجیے. ہم آپ کو بتائیں گے کہ آپ کے سرمایہ کا صحیح استعمال کہاں ہے. لندن، ساؤتھ ایشیا، فار ایسٹ، مڈل ایسٹ، یورپ اور نارتھ امریکہ کی ریئل اسٹیٹ مارکیٹ کا 25 سالہ تجربہ رکھنے والی سید ٹیم کو کال کیجیے 613-276-0398. سید ٹیم، کوسٹ ٹو کوسٹ ریئل اسٹیٹ with Royal Star Realty.
Welcome back and thank you very much for staying with us after the break. And today we're talking about the National Action Summit to fight Islamophobia, which has been called by NCCM and many other organizations. Those who have come together. Finally, this National Action Summit is scheduled to happen on July 22nd. Under Canadian government, all levels of the government are expected to be in attendance. And this is what we want to talk about after the break, is what to expect in terms of the outcomes. So Mustafa, what can you tell us? What are some of the key things that you are seeing or you're recommending which will be easier for our audience to relate and to understand to combat Islamophobia? And also please help us understand, is this something which can be completely rooted out, or we're hoping to minimize the Islamophobia effect in Canada?
Sure. So it's a big question. Maybe I'll start with the latter part of your question before getting to the former. Right now, statistics show, as of 2019, that roughly 40% of Canadians have negative attitudes towards Canadian Muslims. And let's understand what that means. That doesn't mean that 40% of Canadians are racist. What that means is that when you ask them, well, do you want to have a Muslim as their neighbor? They're not so sure about that. They see what goes on Fox News. They see all sorts of negative things about Canadian Muslims. And that leads them to very particular ways of thinking about Canadian Muslims. I think it's really important that each Canadian, whether you're Muslim or not, spend time with your neighbors, spend time with your colleagues, spend time with your children, spend time with the teachers of your children, and talk to them about what it means to be who you are. And for every person, that answer might be a little different, but that is so critically important. I think sometimes we really undervalue the importance of what our Prophet ﷺ taught us, about the importance of moving a piece of garbage on the road, about the importance of planting a tree in front of you. Small acts that are consistent, that drive towards a better tomorrow, so critically important. And I really urge everybody, that's something that everybody can do starting tomorrow. You don't need to wait for our Action Summit. It's a conversation, it's work that you can do every single day. And if we are all doing that collectively, inshallah, we're going to see the change that we need to see.
Very true.
More specifically, I think on the summit itself, we're going to need each and every one of you to help us. Because the reality is that, we're going to push and we're going to ask you to push government to take action. And that means calling your mayor, asking them whether they did what we asked for in our recommendations. It means calling your local MPP or MLA. It means calling the minister who lives in your riding or the MP that lives in your riding and being clear with them. Which of the recommendations are you going to move on? When are they going to get acted on? You need to be clear and you need to be bold in stating very clearly that our lives cannot continue to be put in danger. Our masajid cannot continue to be put into danger. Our future here in this country cannot continue to be put into jeopardy.
Right. And in terms of the summit on 22nd, will there be some parts of the summit or some part of the summit in terms of sessions will be open to general public to join?
I still can't confirm that piece, but I'm sure that there's going to be ample opportunity for members of the Canadian Muslim public to weigh in and to effectively push. Because let me tell you this, we are pushing government from now, and we're going to be pushing government after the summit. And every single person can join into that.
Very good. And a few other questions in terms of, you spoke about the people don't need to wait for the summit and they should have the conversation, people around them at work, at with their neighbors and other places. We all can play a part at the grassroots level. When it comes to volunteering with NCCM, do you offer such opportunities that people can be part of the platform so we channelize our efforts in the right direction in a structured manner?
Absolutely. We're building out volunteer teams in Alberta. We're building out volunteer teams in Ontario. We're building out volunteer teams in Quebec that deal with local and more national issues at the same time. And we need everybody. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a journalist. You don't have to be a policy wonk or a fundraiser. Wherever you're coming from, wherever you're at, if you're passionate about justice, you want to do the right thing, you're interested in listening, you're interested in growing, we're here to. We would love to have you.
So how's the situation when it comes to working with other communities, other faith-based organizations? When it comes to Islamophobia, are they shying away or are they openly supporting NCCM in terms of having this National Action Summit, or generally supporting us in terms of curbing hate or rooting out Islamophobia?
Look, I think that obviously there's a reason that that every single party agreed to the and supported the call for the summit. There is a recognition, at least in theory, that something needs to change. But I think we also need to be very, very clear that words are cheap. We need to see a real commitment to doing more, and of course things have been done, but we need to see much, much more. And I think, later this week and early next week, our recommendations are going to come out publicly. And every single Canadian Muslim and Canadian in general can start to take those things and advocate to government about what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. And, one last question I would ask is on this calling or maybe having this National Action Summit on July 22nd itself. It's a big achievement of NCCM and people and groups supporting behind you. What are the other key 2 or 3 things that you can highlight for our viewers so then they can understand the magnitude, the scope of NCCM and their consistency, their commitment in terms of raising voice on behalf of Canadian Muslims?
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I think the reality is that we're all in this together, and maybe just to kind of talk about some ways that we've been there together. One important issue that I think Canadian Muslims should know about, but also folks around the world should be aware of, is a piece of legislation that's active in Canada called Bill 21, or the Laïcité Act. And what this bill does in Quebec, which is one of our largest provinces, is that it says that if you wear hijab, you can't, for instance, become a prosecutor. You can't become a police officer. We have been fighting that in court, and we've had it. We've been successful in having it partially struck down. But we're appealing and we're moving to have the whole thing dealt with. That's exactly the kind of thing that we at NCCM do. We were at the Supreme Court of Canada at the end of 2020 to talk about the rights of religious institutions. There's a lot of kind of work that we do that you might not know about in terms of our legal advocacy. But also the second thing that I think is important to talk about is some of our education work. A lot of the times what people see is sort of the public-facing political advocacy. But we do a tremendous amount of work with school boards across this, Ontario especially, but also in workplaces, unions, the private sector, to educate people about Canadian Muslims and Islamophobia. And lastly, I think what people should be aware of is the power of community engagement. Let me tell you that when we pushed to have white supremacist groups banned, it wasn't just because we at NCCM and a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of policy people got together to push them in the right direction. Change came, alhamdulillah, because literally at masajid, thousands of people picked up their phones as they were walking out of their masajid and called their local MP. And there were offices that were getting hundreds and hundreds of phone calls about the need for change. That's exactly the kind of thing that we need to continue to see.
Makes sense. And as I said, that was my last question, but one other question before we conclude this show is, as they called, every action has a reaction. اور اردو میں بولتے ہیں کہ تالی دونوں ہاتھ سے بجتی ہے. So once we look at the hate and Islamophobia, is there anything comes top of mind to you to tell our viewers or Canadian Muslims that we should avoid doing this, which is annoying, other people, or maybe they're becoming fearful of us?
I think there's two parts to the question. I think first of all, we have to be clear that the people that passed away in London, the people that passed away in Quebec City, the people that passed away, the gentleman that was made shaheed, and inshallah may Allah grant them all the status of martyrs in all of these places, it wasn't their fault that what happened to them, nor is it the fault of Canadian Muslims what happened to them. The blame is on the person who did it, who committed these acts, and that is where their blame lies. And we have to be cautious as a community to not ascribe blame onto us collectively, because we are made to feel like that it's our fault that these things are happening. But along with that, what I will note in general, just to answer the kind of key question that you're putting forward, I think that each one of us, in thinking about fighting for justice externally for our communities, we need to think about fighting for justice internally. And whether that means standing up for justice in our families, in our masajid, in seeing those who are our neighbors. The Prophet ﷺ told us so much about making sure our neighbors were fed, that they were cared for. These are key things that we need to be thinking about. That we need to be consciously cognizant of in our quest to live to our deen, and to be cognizant of our responsibilities in doing so.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, Farooq, for giving us your time and giving us all the insight about this upcoming summit on July 22nd. On behalf of the community, we thank you, and thanks NCCM for all the efforts, and we look forward to see positive outcomes coming from this summit to help address the issues with hate crime and also fight against Islamophobia. So once again, thank you for joining us tonight on this show.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, the purpose of today's show was to talk about this upcoming National Action Summit, which was called by NCCM and many other organizations, those who came together. And we have high hopes that this time it will deliver what it is supposed to deliver. All parties, including Prime Minister, Liberal Party of Canada, all the other political parties at federal level, provincial level and municipal level, all have shown the will. And if there is a will, there is a way. So with this, I conclude today's show. Please take care of yourself. Inshallah, I'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
کینیڈا سرمایہ کاری کے لیے جنت. ٹورنٹو کی گنجان آبادی کے باعث اب آباد کاری دوسرے شہروں میں. اوٹوا، برامپٹن، مسیساگا، کنگسٹن اور دیگر شہر اب سرمایہ کاری اور آباد کاری کے لیے آئیڈیل. آپ کمرشل، ریزیڈینشل یا انڈسٹریل پراپرٹی خریدنے یا بیچنے کا ارادہ رکھتے ہو تو ٹیم آف سید کو ایک دفعہ کال لازمی کیجیے. ہم آپ کو بتائیں گے کہ آپ کے سرمایہ کا صحیح استعمال کہاں ہے. لندن، ساؤتھ ایشیا، فار ایسٹ، مڈل ایسٹ، یورپ اور نارتھ امریکہ کی ریئل اسٹیٹ مارکیٹ کا 25 سالہ تجربہ رکھنے والی سید ٹیم کو کال کیجیے. 613-276-0398. سید ٹیم، کوسٹ ٹو کوسٹ ریئل اسٹیٹ with Royal Star Real.